The galaxy is vast, cold, and full of dangerous beings, but to Maya Trask, it had always felt small and safe. She knew her father as an unassuming diplomat, living a quiet life on a peaceful human colony. She was a regular 16-year-old, thinking about school, her friends, and what she might do next summer. But that illusion of normalcy was shattered in a moment. Maya was walking back from school, her bag slung over her shoulder, when they came for her. At first, she didn't notice the shadowy figures trailing her, blending into the late afternoon crowd. The streets were familiar, comforting. But comfort meant nothing to the galaxy's darkest creatures. Before she could even register what was happening, a cold, alien hand clamped over her mouth, and a blinding light flashed before her eyes. She felt herself being lifted off the ground, the world around her warping as alien technology wrapped its tendrils around her body. She struggled, kicking and trying to scream, but it was useless. In a blink, Maya was gone. In the cold, sterile halls of the Vathraka cartel's ship, Maya woke up groggy and disoriented. She was bound, trapped in a cell made of alien materials she'd never seen before. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she fought the rising panic. Where was she? Who had taken her? Why? The questions swirled, but one thing was clear: she was in serious danger. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, in the heart of human space, Ethan Trask sat in his quiet home, looking at a picture of Maya. He'd sacrificed everything for this peace, for her to have a normal life. He'd left his past behind, his bloody, violent past that no one knew about, not even his daughter. But when the message came through, his world flipped upside down. A single, chilling sentence flashed across his communicator: asterisk. We have your daughter. Obey or she dies. Asterisk. The Vathraka cartel, notorious for its ruthless dealings in the galaxy's underworld, thought they had an easy target. They assumed Ethan Trask was a simple human diplomat, a weak, vulnerable father who would bend to their demands. They thought they could use Maya as leverage in their twisted games. But they were wrong, dead wrong. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he read the message again. The room around him seemed to grow darker, colder. He'd worked so hard to leave that part of himself behind, but now, there was no other choice. The Reaper had to come out of the shadows once again. Ethan stood, moving to a concealed panel in his home. With a quick swipe, the wall opened, revealing an arsenal of weapons, gadgets, and tools that hadn't seen the light of day in years. He paused for a moment, looking at the lethal array of instruments, then grabbed what he needed. The galaxy had forgotten what he was capable of. It was time to remind them. Far from human-controlled space, the Vathraka cartel was celebrating their easy victory. In their headquarters, Vaska, the leader of the cartel, lounged in his throne, smirking. Humans, he muttered to his subordinates. So easy to break, so desperate to cling to their pathetic families. This one will be no different. The alien cartel members laughed, their voices echoing through the chambers. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Vaska's second-in-command, a hulking brute named Krog, approached, holding a hologram display. The ransom message has been sent. We should hear back soon. The human will fold. They always do. Vaska grinned. Good. Let's remind the galaxy who's really in charge. But back on the human colony, Ethan wasn't folding. He was preparing for war. His first call was to an old contact, a former mercenary named Vex who owed him a life debt. The comm link buzzed for a moment before a gruff voice answered. Ethan? I thought you were dead. Not yet, Ethan growled. I need information. The Vathraka cartel has taken my daughter. There was a pause on the other end. You're going after them, aren't you? Ethan's voice was ice cold. They took the wrong person's daughter. Vex let out a low whistle. I'll get you what you need. But Ethan, be careful. The Vathraka are no joke. I don't care who they are. They're all dead. As Ethan prepared to leave, the weight of his decision settled on him. He knew this would be a one-way trip. The life he'd built for Maya, the peace he'd worked so hard to achieve, it was all over. He couldn't go back to being the quiet father, the diplomat. He had to become something else, something much worse. And he knew the galaxy would never forget what was about to happen. The Vathraka cartel thought they had made an easy score. They thought they had taken a weak human girl. What they didn't realize was that they had just signed their own death warrant. With his gear packed and his mind focused on the mission ahead, Ethan set out, his heart burning with cold fury. His daughter was out there, and nothing in the galaxy would stop him from getting her back. The Reaper had returned. Ethan Trask was already on the move. Every second that passed, he knew Maya was farther from safety, and every second wasted was another step closer to losing her. But Ethan wasn't one to rush blindly. He was methodical, precise, and he had a plan. Years of experience in Black Ops had taught him that survival wasn't about being the fastest or strongest, it was about being the smartest. He tracked the Vathraka down, one lead at a time, and when he did, they would regret ever laying a hand on his daughter. His first stop was a grimy space station on the outskirts of human territory, a haven for smugglers, bounty hunters, and those who lived in the shadows. The kind of place that would attract the attention of a cartel like Vathraka. It wasn't long before Ethan found the right people. Information was easy to come by if you knew how to ask, and if you weren't afraid to break a few bones along the way. The bartender, a scaly alien with too many eyes, barely had time to finish his sentence before Ethan slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressed hard against the alien's throat. "You'll tell me what I want to know," Ethan growled, "or this ends badly for you." The alien sputtered, his eyes darting nervously. "I don't know." Ethan pressed harder. "The Vathraka cartel. Where do they operate?" All right, the alien croaked, gasping for breath. "They've got a stronghold on Arion 4. That's all I know. I swear." Ethan released him, tossing him aside like trash. He didn't care for excuses or lies. He had what he needed. Arion 4, a desolate planet on the fringes of known space, far from the prying eyes of any authority. A perfect place for a cartel to hide out, conduct their business, and stash their prisoners. As Ethan made his way to his ship, the pieces began falling into place. The Vathraka weren't subtle. They relied on fear and intimidation to keep their grip on power, but they were sloppy. They didn't expect a fight, especially not from a human. And that was their first mistake. While Ethan prepared for the long journey ahead, Maya was already working on her own escape. She had woken up inside a cold, damp cell, her hands bound, but her mind was anything but helpless. She was scared, yes, but she was also her father's daughter. She'd been taught to think on her feet, to stay calm under pressure, and most importantly, to never give up. Maya studied her surroundings carefully. The guards were lazy, complacent, and the security was nowhere near as tight as it should have been for a prisoner they planned to ransom. They underestimated her, just like they underestimated her father. And that would be their downfall. She noticed a loose panel in the corner of the cell and quietly began working on it, using a small metal shard she'd found on the ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Maya knew she couldn't take on the whole cartel herself, but if she could create enough chaos, maybe she could give her father a fighting chance when he arrived. Because she knew, without a doubt, that he would arrive. Back on his ship, Ethan was deep in preparation. His mind was focused, calculating. Arion 4 was a heavily fortified planet, but that didn't matter. He'd taken down worse. He'd fought entire armies and left without a scratch. The key was to act before they realized who they were dealing with. Surprise was his greatest ally, and Ethan was a master of exploiting it. He called in another favor, this time from an old associate who specialized in stealth tech. It took some convincing, but once Ethan made his intentions clear, the associate agreed to lend him a cloaking device, capable of slipping through even the tightest planetary defenses. It wasn't cheap, but then again, nothing worth having ever was. As the ship hurtled through space, Ethan's mind drifted to Maya. He remembered the day she was born, the way she looked up at him with those big, innocent eyes. He had sworn that day he would protect her no matter what. And now, here he was, living up to that promise in a way he never imagined. It wasn't long before he arrived at Arion 4, and the planet loomed large in the distance. From space, it looked barren, inhospitable. But beneath its surface was an intricate network of tunnels and strongholds, all controlled by the Vathraka cartel. Getting in would be difficult. Getting out would be near impossible. But Ethan didn't care. He wasn't leaving without Maya. Using the cloaking device, he slipped past the outer defenses undetected. The planet's atmosphere was thick and toxic, but his ship's shields held steady. He landed on a rocky outcrop, far from the main entrance, where he could move unseen. It was time. He moved like a ghost, silent and deadly, his mind focused on the task at hand. Years of training had made him efficient. Every step, every movement was calculated. The guards didn't even know what hit them. One by one, they dropped, silently taken out by the shadows. Ethan worked his way deeper into the compound, avoiding unnecessary conflict when possible, but dispatching anyone who got in his way. Meanwhile, Maya had managed to loosen the panel in her cell. Behind it, a series of wires and circuits connected to the door's locking mechanism. She wasn't an expert in alien tech, but she knew enough to cause trouble. With careful precision, she began crossing the wires, trying to trigger a short circuit. It took several tense minutes, but finally, she heard the telltale click of the door unlocking. Her heart raced as she pushed it open just a crack, peering out into the hallway. The coast was clear, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Maya needed to move fast. Sneaking through the dimly lit corridors, Maya kept low, staying out of sight. She didn't know where she was going exactly, but anywhere was better than the cell. Her goal was simple: find a way to signal her father. If she could just get word to him, they could escape together. But even as she moved, she knew the real danger wasn't the guards or the locked doors. It was the cartel's leader, Vasca. He was ruthless, calculating, and worst of all, he was unpredictable. If he discovered she was missing, the whole base would be on high alert. Time was running out, but Maya wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not when she was so close. In the distance, she heard a faint explosion, followed by the sound of alarms blaring. A small smile crept across her face. She didn't know how, but she knew her father was here. He was coming for her, and together, they were going to bring this whole place down. Maya moved swiftly through the corridors, her heart pounding but her mind sharp. She wasn't just trying to escape now, she was trying to help. She had faith her father was somewhere out there, coming for her, but she wasn't going to sit by and wait. Every second mattered. She needed to create as much chaos as possible to weaken the cartel from the inside. She had spent days observing the patterns of the guards, the way they moved, how they talked. Most of them were complacent, sure of their own dominance, but that was a weakness. The cartel relied on intimidation and brutality, but they had never expected someone like her to be in their midst, someone with the will to fight back. Maya found a control panel tucked away in a maintenance corridor. It was crude alien, but she had picked up enough from the technology her father had taught her over the years to know it was important. She could access the cartel's internal systems from here. She knew she wouldn't be able to cause massive destruction from a single terminal, but she could disrupt their communications, set off some alarms, and maybe even disable a few security systems. Anything to give her father the edge he would need. Her fingers flew over the controls, pulling up screens of information, scanning for weak points. The first thing she did was cut the internal communication lines, making sure the guards couldn't coordinate with each other. Then, she set off a series of security alarms across the base, creating chaos in places she knew were heavily guarded, drawing attention away from her location. Lastly, she managed to deactivate the surveillance cameras in the immediate area, giving herself a few minutes to move undetected. Meanwhile, Ethan was getting closer. Every step he took, every enemy he eliminated brought him one step nearer to his daughter. The further he went, the more he saw signs of Maya's handiwork. Disabled cameras, guards rushing toward false alarms, she was already making her presence known. A part of him swelled with pride, but the other part, the part that had lived through too many battles, knew they were running out of time. The Vathraka would soon realize they weren't dealing with some random human diplomat. Once they figured out who he was, things would escalate fast. Ethan moved with precision, dispatching enemies with silent efficiency. He avoided unnecessary fights, conserving his energy for the inevitable confrontation with Vaska. The deeper he got into the base, the more resistance he encountered, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Years of experience had honed him into a machine of war, a force that couldn't be slowed down by a few poorly trained guards. As he moved, he kept scanning for signs of Maya, but so far there had been nothing. He knew she was alive, he could feel it. But finding her in this maze of tunnels and rooms would be a challenge, even for him. He needed her to make a move, something big enough to catch his attention, to give him a lead on her exact location. Maya, for her part, had no intention of hiding anymore. She had done what she could from the shadows, but now it was time to step out and make her presence known. She grabbed a small tool she had fashioned into a makeshift weapon, and started moving toward one of the larger security hubs she had discovered in the cartel's system. If she could reach it, she might be able to disable the entire base's automated defenses. That would give her father the opening he needed to storm the base and get them both out alive. As she moved, she encountered her first real obstacle, a pair of cartel guards stationed at the entrance to the security hub. They were large, alien creatures with thick, scaly skin and a menacing presence. Maya knew she couldn't take them both on in a straight fight, but she didn't need to. She was smart, and she had the element of surprise on her side. She waited until one of the guards turned away, then she crept up behind the other, using the shadows to her advantage. With one swift motion, she jabbed her makeshift weapon into the back of his neck, hitting a weak spot in his armor. The alien crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Before the second guard could react, Maya was already on him, using the same tactic to take him down. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't easy, but it worked. With the guards out of the way, Maya entered the security hub. The room was filled with alien technology, much of it beyond her understanding, but she didn't need to understand everything. She just needed to find the right controls. After a few minutes of frantic searching, she found what she was looking for: the base's automated defense system. With a few quick commands, she disabled it, shutting down the turrets, the laser grids, everything that could pose a threat to her father. At that exact moment, Ethan was making his way through the final corridor leading to the main compound. The sudden absence of resistance told him everything he needed to know. Maya had done it. She had given him the opening he needed. Now it was up to him to finish the job. He moved quickly, slipping through the now unguarded hallways until he reached the central chamber where Vaska was waiting. The alien leader stood at the far end of the room, flanked by his remaining guards. He was tall and posing, with cruel eyes that glinted with malice. He held a weapon in one hand, a smirk on his face. "So," Vaska sneered, "the human thinks he can take on the Vathraka cartel. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. He had faced men like Vaska before, cowards who hid behind their power, thinking it made them invincible. But no one was invincible, and Ethan had learned that long ago. He stepped forward, ready to end this. The fight that followed was brutal and fast. Ethan moved with deadly precision, taking out Vaska's guards with ease. They had no chance against him. In a matter of minutes, the room was cleared, leaving only Vaska standing. The alien leader tried to fight, but Ethan was relentless. Every move Vaska made was countered, every attack was met with crushing force. In the end, Vaska fell, beaten and broken. Ethan didn't waste any time. He knew Maya was nearby, and he needed to get her out before the rest of the cartel regrouped. He made his way through the base, following the trail of destruction Maya had left in her wake, until finally, he found her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with relief, but also with a determination that mirrored his own. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice steady. Ethan nodded, pulling her into a brief embrace. "Let's get out of here." Together they made their way back to the ship, leaving behind the ruins of the Vathraka cartel's stronghold. The mission was over, but the bond between father and daughter had only grown stronger. They were a team, and nothing in the galaxy could stand in their way now. Ethan and Maya moved quickly through the wreckage of the cartel's stronghold, their steps in sync, both driven by the need to escape before the remaining forces could reorganize. The alarms were still blaring, and the sounds of distant explosions echoed through the halls. The Vathraka cartel had no idea what hit them, and Ethan intended to keep it that way until he and his daughter were far away from this place. As they navigated through the chaos, Maya couldn't help but glance at her father. She had always known he was strong, but this was something else. He wasn't the quiet, peaceful man she had grown up with. The way he moved, the way he reacted, it was clear that this was someone who had seen more violence and destruction than she could have imagined. It was unsettling, but at the same time, she understood now why she had always felt safe with him. He was a force of nature, unstoppable when it came to protecting her. But this wasn't the time for reflection. Maya had spent the past few days planning her survival, and now she was ready to get out. They approached a side passage that led to a hidden exit, one she had scouted earlier. It would lead them directly to the surface, where Ethan's ship was waiting. They could almost taste freedom, but they weren't out of danger yet. As they moved toward the exit, the ground shook violently beneath their feet. Ethan grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her to the side just as a chunk of the ceiling collapsed where they had been standing seconds before. The cartel's stronghold was coming apart, and they needed to move faster. They quickened their pace, their hearts pounding in their chests. Suddenly, a group of heavily armed cartel reinforcements appeared ahead, blocking their path. Maya's breath caught in her throat, but Ethan didn't even blink. Without hesitation, he pulled a weapon from his belt and charged forward, moving with lethal precision. Maya watched in awe as he took down each enemy with swift, practiced efficiency. There was no hesitation in his movements, no wasted energy. Every shot, every strike was perfectly calculated. Within moments, the reinforcements lay on the ground, defeated. Maya stepped over the bodies, following her father closely as they pressed forward. She knew now, more than ever, that this was the only way out. They couldn't afford to slow down. They reached the exit, a hidden hatch concealed in the rock wall. Maya quickly input the code she had memorized, and the doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the night sky above. They were almost there. But as they stepped out into the open, a figure emerged from the shadows. Vaska, battered and bruised but still alive, stood before them, his eyes burning with rage. He had barely survived his encounter with Ethan, and now, he was looking for revenge. In his hand, he held a high-powered energy weapon, aimed directly at them. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Vaska snarled, his voice thick with hatred. "You've destroyed everything. You've taken everything from me. Now I'll make you suffer." Ethan stepped in front of Maya, shielding her with his body. His eyes locked onto Vaska's, cold and unflinching. "You took my daughter," Ethan said, his voice low and deadly. "That was your first and last mistake." Vaska sneered, his grip tightening on the weapon. "I'll kill you both." Before Vaska could pull the trigger, Maya acted. In a split second, she threw a small device, one she had taken from the security hub, directly at Vaska's feet. It detonated in a flash of light, disorienting him just long enough for Ethan to move. Ethan lunged forward, closing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. In one fluid motion, he disarmed Vaska and slammed him to the ground. The alien leader gasped for breath, his face twisted in shock and fear. Ethan knelt beside him, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable finality. "You won't hurt her. Ever again." With that, Ethan delivered the final blow. Vaska's body went limp, his reign of terror ended in an instant. Ethan stood up, breathing heavily but not satisfied with the victory. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about protecting his daughter, and now that she was safe, that was all that mattered. Maya stepped forward, looking down at the alien leader's lifeless form. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, fear, and a deep sense of closure. She had been taken, threatened, and put through hell, but in the end, she had survived. And more than that, she had fought back. Standing beside her father, she felt a strength she had never known before. "Let's go," Ethan said, his voice softening as he turned to her. "It's over." Maya nodded, and together they walked toward the ship. The night was quiet, the chaos of the battle fading behind them. The ship's engines hummed to life as they boarded, the familiar hum bringing a sense of safety. As they lifted off from the surface, Maya turned to her father. "Dad, thank you?" Ethan looked at her, his face softening for the first time since the mission began. "You don't need to thank me, Maya. I promised I'd always protect you. That will never change." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had always known her father would do anything for her, but now she truly understood what that meant. He wasn't just a diplomat. He wasn't just her dad. He was a warrior, a protector, and no one in the galaxy could ever take that from him. As the stars stretched out before them, Maya let herself relax for the first time in days. They were safe. They were together. And nothing in the universe could break that bond. Ethan set the ship on course, steering them away from the ruined stronghold and back toward the safety of human space. His mind, however, was still racing. He knew that this wasn't the end. The galaxy was vast, and there were more threats out there, more dangers lurking in the shadows. But as long as he had Maya by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. Maya leaned back in her seat, her eyes growing heavy. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, and exhaustion was taking over. But as she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind: they had survived. They had won. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Ethan glanced over at his daughter, watching as she slept peacefully for the first time since this nightmare had begun. He knew there would be no peace for him, not as long as there were people out there willing to threaten his family. But for now, at least they were safe. He would do anything to keep it that way.